This is a set of numbers, and I'm sure you remember set theory from elementary and middle school math class. Without context, though, these numbers really don't have a meaning, and they're not even really good numbers for a bingo board. For our guests today, in our meeting room, we have a large bingo board. We've never turned it on in our meeting yet. It might be an interesting idea to turn on a bingo board sometime. But these numbers without context are seemingly random. But in America, approaching retirement, these numbers do have meaning. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our guests today, it's not my intent in this speech to go through these numbers and explain the roles that they play approaching retirement, because it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody in the audience. I do want to talk about another number coming up that I believe has an impact both to retirement and to our lives, and I hope it has value to all of us in today's meeting. And I like this bingo board because at least it had a couple of the numbers in my list of retirement numbers, so I've had to include it. But the number I do want to talk about is 2000. Again, without context, 2000 could have a lot of meanings. It could be the number of pounds in 1 ton. It could be the first year of the millennium. It could be the year of Y2K. But I attended a web lecture a few weeks ago, and the speaker was talking about another meaning that 2000 can have, especially as people are approaching retirement. And one thing I've noticed as I've been approaching retirement is that so much of the emphasis and discussion and talk about retirement is going toward money. Do you have enough money? When are you going to take it out? How are you going to manage it? And this speaker flipped that completely around and said, there's a second issue, and most people don't think about it. And it's, what are you going to do with 2,000 hours a year? 40-hour work week times 50 weeks a year. Now that middle number, 40, may vary depending on your industry and your country. As Yue talked about last week, his experience as an engineer in Taiwan, that middle number was a lot bigger than 40 hours a week. So that could be a lot larger number depending where you're working and what you're doing. I thought that was an interesting point. What are you going to do with all this time? And that now leads to some other ideas that I've been thinking about purpose and meaning. And one of the more common quotes on the internet talking about purpose and meaning comes from the American poet Mary Oliver, where she wrote in her poem, The Summer Day at the End, doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And it's interesting that I think that the last two lines of that quote really need that first line, but every image on the internet talking about Mary Oliver and this poem always include the last two lines about what are you going to do with that one wild and precious life, and they tend to forget the first line. So I think part of what the 2,000 hours come into are goals, desires. And I did attend a workshop a couple of years ago led by Richard Leiter, who is a Twin Cities speaker, coach, author, and he's now working at a center at the University of Notre Dame. And Richard Leiter has written several books. He's taken tour groups to Africa, and based on some of his experiences in Africa, he's written books about how much do we really need? And that's when he talks about repacking your bags as one of his well-known titles about how much stuff, how many possessions do you really need in your life compared to the people the tribes that he's worked with in Africa. And Richard Leiter has come up with a couple of questions to get to purpose, where he talks about if you're looking for a 2-sentence purpose statement for your day, how did I grow? How did I give? And he has this equation going through here about how to determine your calling, looking at your gifts, what your passion is, what your values are. And I attended this seminar and I received something like a deck of cards called calling cards. And part of the goal was to work through those cards in a short period of time, try to get some of the biases out and try to understand, what my key interests are. I'm probably at a point of having to redo that exercise, looking at that set of cards and come up with something that maybe can be more useful to me going forward into retirement. But I also think that there's questions like, how do we use our time? What can we do with our time today while we're working, not even thinking about retirement, not even close to retirement? And this week, as part of World Mental Health Days, IBM sponsored a lecture by Laurie Santos, who is a professor at Harvard University. She teaches the most popular class at Harvard University on happiness. And she ended her talk with two ideas I want to share here at the end of this talk. Her first idea was time affluence, which I'd never heard before, had always heard about affluence in terms of money. But Laurie Santos talked about what is time affluence. And I screen captured this from a brief talk that she gave. And she said, time affluence, do you have time to do what you want to do? Which I know I struggle with managing today, and I believe many of us struggle with managing today. Is there enough time? And I thought in some ways, thinking about that, retirement can sometimes seem like winning the time lottery. You know, I've gained, when that time comes and I retire, I gain 2,000 hours a year. I've won the time lottery. What do I do with it? Well, that's probably the same type of question that people that win a cash or money lottery end up asking. What do I do with it? And we've heard many stories of lottery winners whose lives are completely changed. The money's lost. Their lives are irrevocably changed because they've won the lottery, and they're sometimes no better or worse off than they were when they had won the lottery. And I thought that was a good warning, that how to handle time can be just as important as how to handle money. So Laurie Santos suggested two ideas on how to manage time today as we're working, retired, approaching retirement. And the first one was she suggested that there are ways and appropriate times to spend money to gain time. But then after that's done, use that time in a constructive purpose. Her example came from ordering carryout. And I had to choose a Five Guys burger image for this because I typically don't do burgers very well at my house. So to me, this resonated very well. If I decide to say order carryout from Five Guys or Newt's or any other local burger place, then think through what it would take for me to do a similar burger. How much time would it take? I'd have to go to the store and get ingredients, get my skillet warmed up or get the grill started, prepare the hamburger. And then she said, okay, figure out how much time all that takes. And if you've decided I'm going to buy this in carry out, then you figure out, is it 90 minutes, perhaps 2 hours that it would take to do all this? And you've saved 2 hours by going to carry out. But make sure those 2 hours are used for a project that you want to get done, something that has been maybe delayed, or you need a good piece of time to work with. And I thought that was interesting because I know it's too often the times when I'm thinking about getting something to eat prepared by someone else, I'm just looking to not cook. I'm not looking to reapply that time that I'm saving in cooking and use it somewhere else. And some of that can be applied in other tasks too. If I say, and I will hire somebody to help rake leaves this year because I find it's a task I don't like anymore. But I've never thought of saying, if I'm saving 8 to 10 hours by not raking, how would I use those 8 to 10 hours in another task that I've been putting off or wanting to get done or starting? And I thought that was an interesting statement to think about how I use time today. And I hope for all of us that it matters too. The second topic she talked about was a phrase I had not heard before called time confetti. And I was thinking if I were in the club today, I would bring some confetti or sprinkles and start flying them around the podium, though I would get probably in trouble with the proprietors of Charlie's by adding to the, causing more trash on the floor. So I decided not to show that today. Time confetti is a relatively recent idea, and it talks about where we do have open time in our schedules today, but we often think they're too small to do anything with. They're 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe between one meeting at work and starting another meeting. There's a 5 to 10 minute gap, and we often will think about checking email or checking our news websites to see what's going on. And her thought was that if you have a list of items that you could do in 5 to 10 minutes, and those times come up during the day, use those gaps as something as small as confetti. One thing perhaps is to text somebody to say, how's it going today? Another thing might be to forward an email to a friend or a family member to say, hey, I saw this and thought you would like it. And her thought was that by using these pieces of time effectively throughout the day, that we feel like we gain more control over everything that comes to us, and maybe a way to help gain some more control over what's going on in front of us. Part of that at the beginning would be writing a list of what are these really short tasks I want to get done in 5 to 10 minutes today. So I know retirement's going to take more than finding 5 to 10 minutes every day. And that's a task for me to work on, is to determine when that time comes, what would I do with those 2,000 hours, that wild and precious life. But I also know that what I've showed today can help me in what's going on in my life today. And I hope that these ideas can find some value as what you're going through in your lives today. And if you do, let me know how it goes. I can't take credit for the ideas, but I can give you the sources, and I can at least refer you to them. Mr. Toastmaster, back to you.